I was gonna tell a time travel joke, but you guys didn't like it. Ha 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 ha! Kris, Dave, time travel, next. Ladies and gentle nerds, welcome back to a new episode of the Nerd Byword podcast. We have reached episode 96, believe it or not. The countdown is on to episode 100. In this week's episode, Kris and I will discuss some of our all-time favorite time travel episodes of television series or time travel-based franchises, and discuss a little bit what makes a good time travel story. But before that, it is, of course, as always, time for... Now, Kris, this new story you're bringing to the table this week is a little disturbing in my book.
It truly is, and I want to preface this story. We do try our best to use appropriate pronouns. Sometimes we falter, but that is out of no malice or anything. So we are talking Ezra Miller Unhinged, and Ezra Miller uses they, them pronouns. If at any point in this story we use any other pronouns, we pre-apologize. But a restraining order has been filed against them after bursting into a couple's Hawai'i hostel bedroom, threatening them, stealing their passport, wallet, and other belongings. Now, this came just days after being arrested, after Miller was arrested on multiple charges stemming from a situation at a local Hilo, Hawaii bar in which, quote, this is quoting the police report, Miller began yelling obscenities, at one point grabbed the microphone from a 23-year-old woman singing karaoke, a disorderly conduct offense, and later lunged at a 32-year-old man playing darts, a harassment offense, police stated. The bar owner asked Miller to calm down several times to no avail, end quote. It would appear that Ezra Miller has heard one too many renditions of Bradley Cooper and Lady Gaga's hit song Shallow, as that song proved to be the linchpin of the bar fiasco. Miller,
I mean, in fairness, that would trigger me too at this point.
I'm a fan. I'm going to go the other way on that one. Miller, who is currently visiting Hawaii, has been the subject of at least 10 police complaints since March the 7th, including an instance where the 29-year-old actor was allegedly filming people at a gas station. This is not their first altercation caught on, made known to the public. In April 2020, video surfaced of Miller trying to choke a female fan at an Iceland bar. They became visibly agitated after being approached by fans and were subsequently escorted off the premises. However, no charges were filed stemming from that situation. In addition to the starring, maybe, role in the upcoming Flash film, who knows with how many Batmen are in it, Miller will also appear in this month's Fantastic Beasts, The Secrets of Dumbledore. Dave, I have no idea what to do with this. Like, what does WB do from here? Like, the Flash movie to begin with, most of the attention around that is around every other character appearing in that film. Miller has seemingly gone off the deep end. Like, this is like one of those True Hollywood stories already. Like, you usually get like 10, 20 years later. Like, this is some wild stuff.
Yeah, there's definitely something weird going on here. I'm really not quite sure how to deal with this story. I will say that obviously the Flash movie is going to be in trouble if our friend Ezra doesn't start restraining himself a little bit, because from a publicity standpoint, this is just going to make the movie and the production look very bad, and WB is going to be hesitant to put him out front to help market this movie. You know, in the late night talk show circuit. Thank you. Yeah, so it is going to be a struggle to put, them out front as a promoter of this film, given, this sort of criminal history. Obviously, we don't know all the details of everything going on there, although, there are some police reports that have been leaked and the like. I'll also point out, though, two things that I find extremely interesting about this. One, I think it's interesting that once again the Snyder Bros are on social media are taking the absolute worst tack to this, flooding Twitter over the last 48 hours or so prior to recording this with all sorts of a friend of a friend of a friend of a guy that I know in Hawaii says that this is all a bunch of lies, and the police is really harassing Ezra Miller and all this. And I'm not quite sure how to take that. I know there's a huge fandom for anybody and everybody who was even tangentially connected to the Snyder DC productions. But I think in this particular case, when you have police reports, that might not be the best route to take. The other thing I find really fascinating is how quiet it has been since these news stories have started hitting, with WB not making any statements or saying anything about this, even though as you mentioned, the new Fantastic Beasts movie is coming soon, The Flash soon thereafter.
Another WB production, we should note.
Yeah, both WB productions, and contrast this with the story I really didn't want to talk about because everybody has a take on it. But contrast this with the slap heard round the world, where Will Smith at the Oscars slapped Chris Rock after a joke, and all the condemnation that has been flying around specifically for this one act. Whereas you have a litany of offenses from Miller, and they are not being held, I would say, to the same accountability level as somebody like Will Smith is. So I think it's the silence from WB, from Hollywood, generally speaking, around all this it is truly deafening. There seems to be a bit of a double standard going on here, and I'm not quite sure what that stems from.
Yeah, I'm going to resist the urge to comment on the latter portion there because I'm just exhausted at this point. How has it already been a week? And good gracious. But anyway, yeah, it's really strange. And it's also interesting that our last episode was on separating art from artists. And at this point with the Snyder Bros and the Snyder cult, let's call it what it is, I want to try and separate fans from artists, like at this point.
Yes.
I have nothing against Zack Snyder. Some of his stuff I really dig. Like Army of the Dead was like ridiculously fun. Like I had a lot of fun watching that for this show and reviewing it. And to the point where I was like, maybe their horror stuff like is more up my alley, which is crazy for me being a non-horror person. But like I really vibed with that movie. I really, really enjoyed it. Their take on the DC characters is not my thing. But then again, I did watch Dark Phoenix for the first time, strictly for comedic value. And say what you want about Zack Snyder's vision for the DC universe, nothing is as awful as what my favorite mutants were done, what was done to them, because it's not a competition for the worst comic book films. That one is just so awful, and that last string of X-Men films in particular. So yeah, it really is crazy, and you don't know where to go from here. If we go strictly business, Ezra Miller's interpretation of the Flash was not my favorite. I thought it was a discount Peter Parker. And from what I know about Barry Allen, that's more that doesn't really seem in line with the Barry Allen character. And I saw somebody with a great take. We should have just used Grant Gustin to begin with. So as many issues as I have with the CW Flash series, Grant Gustin and Candace Patton, who's perfect, are not one of them. So yeah, I have no idea where we're going to go from here.
Yeah, it's a troubling situation for sure for the WB, which seems to have continuous issues anytime that they try to adapt any kind of DC property, it seems like.
All right, speaking of karaoke, though, Dave, another favorite is Too Little Too Late, and that has made me think of your new story.
Yeah, it turns out that Sony has finally unveiled its Game Pass competitor, which is basically a revamped version of the PlayStation Plus program that they've had in the past. They have created a 3-tier system because, of course, why would you want to do something simple when you can make it difficult? So in this particular case, PlayStation's Game Pass competitor is going to follow the following tiers. Tier 1 is PlayStation Plus Extra. No, I apologize. Let me go ahead and rephrase this. PlayStation Plus Essential is basically the original PlayStation Plus membership, which is basically 2 monthly downloadable games, some discounts, cloud storage for saved games, and online multiplayer. And this sucker will run $9.99 a month or $59.99 a year. The second tier is PlayStation Plus Extra, which obviously has all of the essential tier stuff, plus a catalog of up to 400 of the most enjoyable PS4 and PS5 games, including blockbuster hits from our PlayStation Studio catalog and third-party partners. And this will be $14.99 a month or $99.99 yearly. And then PlayStation Plus Premium is sort of the biggest, tallest order of it all the benefits of the previous 2 tiers, plus adds up to 340 additional games, including PS3 games available via cloud streaming, a catalog of beloved classic games available in both streaming and download options from the original PlayStation, PlayStation 2, and PSP generations, cloud streaming for certain games of the PlayStation, PS2, PSP, and PS4, and that will run $17.99 a month or $119.99 yearly. Couple interesting things to note here. So first, from my understanding of how this thing is structured, backwards compatibility via disc is not going to be an option. So if you have a PlayStation 1 disc of a game, you won't be able to pop it in like you do on the Xbox and then download the backwards compatible emulation patch so you can play that without an extra charge or anything. So that's out of the door. Also interesting to note, PlayStation 3 games will be only available on the premium tier via cloud streaming. I'm assuming this is because the PlayStation 3 had a notoriously difficult, unique architecture, and because of that, it's even for Sony almost impossible to emulate on some of their newer machines, so they're going to have to use cloud streaming to achieve that. The biggest difference, I would say, though, between this and Xbox's Game Pass is that first-party titles will not release to the service day and date, which means you might be able to sit on, Xbox Game Pass and get something like Halo Infinite on the day it releases for free on Game Pass with your subscription. This will not happen with something like, God of War Ragnarok when it releases. It will not be available day and date. You still have to go out and drop your $60 to buy it. And so from a business standpoint, to a certain extent, that makes sense, considering, their first-party games from Sony are pretty successful as it is. But given the storm of studio buying that Microsoft has been engaged in, I find it difficult to believe that this is going to long-term be the best strategy for Sony. Because, with stuff like Bethesda now in their back pocket, you have these super, huge major releases hitting Game Pass day and date. I think that is going to continue to be something that attracts people to Game Pass over this new PlayStation Plus lineup. So, I'm glad that they kind of started figuring out things a little bit. I'm glad that, people are going to start being able to play at least some PlayStation 2 games and PlayStation 3 games on their newer consoles. I think that has been something that's been really sorely lacking. I think for a lot of people, unless they were there, I think the PlayStation 3 generation is like this huge question mark. A lot of those games might find a lot of fans now again. Now that is easily available on a modern console, I think that's great. But I also think, as you said in the introduction, that this is maybe a little too late at this point. Xbox Game Pass is sitting at something like 25 million subscribers at this point, and they still sound like the better deal overall. Not to mention the fact that you, of course, have the ability through Microsoft Rewards to basically get your Game Pass membership for free rather than having to, pour down $120 yearly. So, what do you think here, Kris?
I think that not releasing things day and date is a little bit shallow.
Don't come at me, bro. Don't come at me. That song's reaching my heart will go on levels for me.
As far as my love for Xbox Game Pass, I'm off the deep end. Watch as I dive in.
I'm gonna need therapy after this podcast.
No, but seriously, I at the risk of sounding like a broken record, like how many times do I have to come on this show and just shout from the rooftops how much I love Xbox Game Pass? Like, particularly as someone, as I detailed before, that took several years off for gaming. Kids are expensive, and I had a lot of time, wrangling toddlers and everything, so I didn't have a whole lot of time for video games. And then with something like Game Pass, where I can go back and play first generation Xbox games, 360 games that I missed out on, like all of my free time is spoken for. And then with new games that not only do you get them day and date, you can also pre-download them, so you don't have to sit there and like, for example, MLB 22, the show. The new game is, I think, releasing later this week, but I already have it downloaded. So as soon as like Xbox opens the floodgates, I can go play it because it's already downloaded. One of my nitpicks of buying new games in this generation of gaming. And then you have this one flew under my radar, but this game called Weird West, it might be a future nerd commendation. I haven't played it a whole lot, but Dave, this sounds like something you'd enjoy. Weird West is like this horror Western, like it's like if like Red Dead Redemption and insert horror game, I don't know, like had a love child, and not, in addition to fighting bandits, you're fighting zombies in the Wild West. So it's like really cool. The controls and the mechanics are taking me a little bit of time to adjust, but it's a really cool game, and I got it day one. So I don't know what to tell you at this point. Like, and my social media, I have friends that are Sony gamers, and of course they're resting on their laurels of we're the best. We have the big name titles and the exclusives, and I'm just like, okay, you go. I hope that keeps you warm at night, because I'm just playing a butt ton of games that are awesome. So yeah, I think everybody's pretty much entrenched in their camps, but I'm very happy where I'm at.
See, that is me too. I think with the launch of the original Xbox One, I think so. Microsoft made a lot of mistakes, and Sony was able to capitalize on that. But in the meantime, in order to kind of fix the mistakes of that generation, I think slowly over time, Microsoft has become just somehow the more fan-friendly, the more gamer-friendly company. And I know that's really hard to believe. But if you look at Sony versus, Nintendo versus Microsoft, I think out of the three big players in the gaming industry right now, Microsoft is by far the more gamer-oriented. Even Nintendo makes some really, really weird, questionable decisions sometimes that makes, gamers extremely angry. So I think Microsoft right now is just kind of knocking it out of the park, and I'm hoping that they'll continue like this. Alrighty, folks. Well, that's it for Nerd News. Stick around, because after this first break, we're going to come back with some time travel jokes. So stick around. Ladies and gentlemen, people, welcome back. It is time for a long and unhealthy discussion about time travel in this week's Kris, what do we want? Time travel. When do we want it? That's irrelevant. In this week's Big Talk, we're going to go ahead and dive into some of our all-time favorite time travel stories. These can be franchises that are predominantly reliant on time travel. These can be individual episodes or comic books or storylines, anything time travel related that we find just really, really works. And maybe in the course of this discussion, we'll discover some of the rules for how to make a really good time travel story, at least in the opinion of a couple of nerds. So, Kris, your first time travel story franchise is what?
Okay, so this episode has kind of been in the works for quite a long time. It was proposed by you. You have a deep like knowledge and experience when it comes to time travel. Me, not so much. So I was kind of hesitant, but I finally sat down and thought, like, what time travel stories or games or franchises do I enjoy? It's not something that I'm like super well versed in, but I was finally able to sit down and hammer something out. So I'm excited to dig into your bona fides, if you will. But the first thing that jumps out as far as like a time travel story that I just love near and dear is, stop me if I've said this before, but the Assassin's Creed franchise. As like a history nut lover, the idea of historical fiction has always gripped me. I read like when I was in elementary school, like I read the super abridged picture book version of the Three Musketeers, and just from that point I was just hooked on anything that I could get my hands on that was a historical fiction. And so when Assassin's Creed came around, I was all in, and I've always, I made it my career choice. I've always been fascinated with cultures and faiths and languages that were not my own. And so going to, the Middle East in the early centuries AD was just a fascinating thing. And then it really kicked into high gear with starting with Assassin's Creed 2, which I've talked about as being one of the most influential favorite video games of all time. But like even that trilogy of games surrounding Ezio Auditore da Firenze, and just watching that character progression, jumping back and forth, and just the idea of tying DNA and heritage into something like that is a really unique concept and really, really cool. And then being able to tell this centuries long story of the Hatfields and McCoys of medieval history, of the Templars and the Assassins, is really fascinating. And I know we've joked about it before, where the present day stuff isn't as compelling as like the ancient histories or medieval history stuff, but particularly the Ezio collection that I have in my library that I revisit regularly. And I'm not usually a rereader or someone who rewatches things or replays things, because I already know how the story ends and it's not really compelling to me. But that's like the high mark of a good story is, if I want to revisit it, then it must be good, because usually I'm just like, I already know how this, I usually don't watch movies over and over again unless they're an absolute favorite, or games or anything like that. But yeah, the Assassin's Creed franchise is one of my all-time favorites, and time travel just happens to be a part of it.
Yeah, it's really interesting that you mentioned that. It's Assassin's Creed is an interesting series for me, in that I played the first couple and then kind of fell off the wagon a little bit, and then came back with Origins and really found
Origins. Oh my God. I love Origins. I just started playing Origins again. That's how good it is. It's so perfect.
Yeah, I think the revamped gameplay that they kind of started with Origins, I think was a very, very smart move. It really kind of shifts the franchise in a very interesting direction. But I also find it interesting that, from my understanding, starting with Origins, sort of the future stuff, the present day stuff, has been kind of dropped.
It's been tweaked a little bit, and it's not nearly as involved as the previous iterations.
Yeah. So it seems like at least that element of the story, the time travel portion, seems to be becoming less and less relevant to what they're doing, which I think is kind of sad. Because even though I think that particular storyline through the first couple games at least felt like it was kind of treading water a little bit, I think there's definitely something there that makes it unique than just another, video game that happens to be set in the past, So here's hoping that they don't completely abandon that, and they kind of find a better rhythm for present day segments to kind of keep that science fiction-y nature of it alive a little bit, Kris.
Yeah, it's really fascinating. Now they have a unique thing, and this character's name is escaping me. But one of the interesting things that they have that's developed, and for me, I think that I'm jumping around here, but what I loved about Origins is we had the first non-European hero, and like finally, and we jumped right back into Europe after that. So as much as I love Greek mythology and Greek history, Odyssey was fun, and I am a Norseman myself, so Ragnarok was fun. But just the idea of ancient Egypt and just diving into that world and immersing yourself was fascinating. But yes, so like the present day stuff is less included, I guess, but I think Odyssey, I don't want to give away too much. I don't want to spoil too much here, but especially with Odyssey and distinctly with Ragnarok, there's some really interesting things that they have done with the present day stuff and tying that into the ancient history stuff, and really kind of turned it on its head. So when you get there, I'd be interested to revisit that.
Yeah, I think so. I think we can definitely do that.
All right, Dave. We talked about this series not too long ago with the reboot on the horizon.
Oh boy. Well, so here's the dealio. When it comes to time travel stories, I think there are probably no finer franchises than Quantum Leap. This is a science fiction TV series created by Donald P. Bellisario. It aired on NBC for 5 seasons from 1989 through 1993, and it's just a beautiful piece, I think, of television. A lot of time travel stories get incredibly involved with like the rules of time travel and what you can and can't do while you're in the past. And usually, a lot of time travel stories, they kind of rely on like big scenarios, big moments, and saving the world. And Quantum Leap, I think, smartly kind of sidesteps a lot of this stuff, in that it very, very rarely engages directly with really, really big, huge historical events or personalities, besides, like kind of brushes with fame, right? But what it really focuses on, that I find so very endearing about this show, is that it focuses on small scale situations. It's about, individual characters, families, on the verge of falling apart and all that sort of thing. And the purpose of the show very much it is fixing something in the past, only it's not something so big that it would completely change the world if it were fixed. So, you have Dr. Sam Beckett, who's a physicist, and he tests his machine to travel into the past and basically gets stuck, bouncing from time period to time period and looking for a way home. And every time that he leaps through time, he basically replaces an individual in the past, and everybody sees him as that individual. So he basically slides into these different people's lives and then tries to figure out what went wrong in this person's life, or in the lives of the people around this person, and then tries to fix that. And that is a very personal, character-driven level of storytelling that many time travel stories don't ever quite achieve, with some exceptions. And so bringing it down to this really personal level makes it a really, really strong time travel series for me. In addition, because of the way it's set up, you have, constantly like a rotating cast of characters. So even if a particular episode or scenario doesn't appeal to you, well, don't worry. Next week, it's going to be something completely different. And of course, the show being a product of its time, late 80s, early 90s, it doesn't always perfectly hit the mark when it does try to take on, social ills of the past. But it does make, I think, a valiant attempt oftentimes to comment on the difficulties of, minority groups, of women in the past trying to make in the workforce, and so on and so forth. And there are episodes that have stuck with me over the years as just a really heart-wrenching or heartwarming that have never quite let me go since I was a child. I keep coming back to this show, even though it's aging now and not everything holds up. So I really love the original Quantum Leap series, which is why, as we talked about before, the remake, I have some trepidations about, because, this show is special because of the approach that it took to time travel and how it tried to make things extremely personal and character driven. And I don't think they always get that right in science fiction TV shows anymore. A lot of stuff is very spectacle driven, and Quantum Leap is not that. It's good because it's not that, Kris.
And I think I just had an epiphany, an aha moment, if you will, and I think one of the reasons that I've kind of been kind of blasé about time travel is, as I just said, I don't like knowing how the story ends. And what's the number one rule with time travel? The butterfly effect. You can't go back and change anything because you can't change the course of history. So I think that's where I find some of that stuff unappealing. In the case of your second story, not to put the cart before the horse, I think why I love things like that is because it's set in the future and we don't know how things develop. But that's a really interesting, observation, is like, we're not, going back and trying to radically change, world history, but like smaller scale individual citizens and their stories type of stuff is kind of an interesting spin on that. Because usually it's the same old tropes of we can't go change anything. And, so everything is right back where it started from. And that's not really that interesting to me. So I'm glad to see this is something different.
And I think Doctor Who has taken, I think, over the years, a very interesting approach to that too, because in a way they figured out how to have their cake and eat it too when it comes to that.
How in the world did you, not spoiler alert, how did you not put any Doctor Who on your list?
I actually played around with Doctor Who, a couple episodes in particular, but when it comes right down to it, I think Quantum Leap has had a bigger impact on me long term because I came to it sooner. I never had a chance really to see Doctor Who until much later. And a couple of the other things were just more impactful on me long term. Doctor Who was very light and breezy in most cases and not super dramatic, which is, fun in its own way. And it has really, really huge ideas sometimes, which I absolutely adore about it too. But as far as like long term impact on me personally, I wanted to keep things a little more, personal, I guess, when it comes to my picks here.
Also, it's got to be the slug people, right?
Obviously.
I legitimately, I have a billion things on my to watch, to read, to play list, and every time I come back to that, I'm like, okay, I need to pause. Like, that's just disgusting.
So Doctor Who's solution to that whole what's going to happen thing is that the show basically postulates that there's two different types of events. There are events that are flexible and malleable. You can change them without any major repercussions. It might change the future, but in the grand scheme of time, that's okay. And then there are certain things that are fixed points in time. These are unchangeable and unalterable. And if you attempt to change those, you will either fail or you'll basically break time because these fixed points cannot be altered. And so, you're constantly moving through the show, and you're wondering, is this something that's fixed? Is this something that can be changed? And so the outcome is never quite clear in Doctor Who, which keeps, the suspense going a little bit. And I think it addresses that problem you mentioned of always knowing where things end up pretty well. All right, Kris, so what is your second pick as far as time travel stories?
Well, it's not a proper list if it doesn't have X-Men on it for me. So...
I noticed.
and I vented about this earlier a little bit, but I think one of the greatest disappointments of my nerd life is the cinematic universe of the X-Men. Now, the film Days of Future Past isn't awful, but it's not great either. And if that's your standard of, X-Men films, then I'm okay with just neglecting it. And probably my greatest critique and greatest issue with that is something we touched on our fixing of the first X-Men film is Wolverine can't be the point of view character, and just retconning or retooling with all of that just to take your most popular character and make him the center of it all, I think was that film's greatest sin. But In contrast, the comic book, its source material, its inspiration, written by none other than Chris Claremont, and the art done by John Byrne. Claremont, Byrne, I mean, ask any X-Men fan, they'll tell you to go directly to Claremont, Byrne. That's the height, of X-Men comics for most people. And this is probably when they were at their height creatively. So you have adult Kate Pryde projecting her mind and consciousness into her younger self, Kitty Pryde, to stop an assassination attempt by Mystique that will set off this chain of events in the future and prevent the future that Kate is living in, that is ruled by Sentinels. Mutants are in internment camps and almost completely eradicated. So I'm just such a Claremont fan. As a fan of classical literature, I know some people criticize Claremont for being extremely wordy, but that's my bread and butter, so I absolutely love it. And then Byrne for all of his whatevers, character-wise, individually, his art is impeccable. So Claremont and Byrne just knocking it out of the park, creatively speaking, and crazy to think that this entire arc is just 2 issues. So yeah, we're talking Uncanny X-Men 141 and 142, originally published in 1981. So it's not like a heavy homework assignment if you wanted to check it out. But Days of Future Past is one of like the high watermarks of X-Men comics, and one of my all-time favorite time travel stories.
And it's interesting because for me, I've actually never sat down and read the actual comic book. I've seen the movie, obviously, and I thought it was passably fine. Didn't exactly blow my mind or anything, but it wasn't as offensive as some other X-Men movies have been. Some of those X-Men movies are borderline crimes against comic nerddom, I think. So I'm very interested in reading this. I might have to slide into Marvel Unlimited and give this one a check out, because I really know nothing about the original comic book besides what some people have said to me over the years, including you.
All right, so here's something interesting, a connection with what we were just talking about. I'm reading from the Wikipedia page here. John Byrne devised the plot for Days of Future Past since he wanted to do a story featuring the Sentinels, and his collaborator Chris Claremont had no interest in coming up with one. Years later, Byrne said he realized that he unconsciously lifted the, quote, spine of the plot from the 1972 Doctor Who serial Day of the Daleks.
That sounds about right, yeah. And you know what? I hadn't considered that, but that seems like a probably a fair thing to say. Wow. Now I really want to read it.
All right, Dave. I'd let you call dibs on this one, but that's okay because we both love it so much.
Yeah, I think it's fair to say that Deep Space Nine is probably both of our favorite Star Trek series at this point. And I think it still holds up tremendously well. And there are things, individual episodes, that I think transcend, Deep Space Nine as a series and transcend Star Trek. And one of those episodes is episode 75. It was the second episode of season 4 or 5. I'm not quite sure. Season 4. Third episode of season 4, and it's called The Visitor. And this particular episode deals with Captain Benjamin Sisko being in sort of the usual kind of, accident of technobabble and being sort of unstuck in time. And we get to see his son Jake grow up, become obsessed with trying to rescue his father because his father keeps popping up over, many, many years in Jake's life, kind of appears, speaks to him briefly, and then, goes back to being stuck in time. And I hope I'm explaining this well, Chris, but I think the gist of this episode is very much in the line of something like Quantum Leap. It's very, very personal. It's very small scale. This is not some huge epic, special effects fest. This is, a son suffering from survivor's guilt, that just wants his father back. And that core of it, and the love between those two characters, and that father-son dynamic, which is so important to Deep Space Nine overall, I think has never been finer than in this episode. Kudos also to Tony Todd, who pops up in this one as the older Jake, Candyman,
Kern, brother of Worf.
Yeah, who absolutely carries this episode. His performance is so incredible. And the whole thing is so heart-wrenching, and it comes to this really bittersweet conclusion. It still puts a tear in my eye, even though I've seen this episode probably 5 or 6 times at this point. It just never gets old, and it is again, to me at least, the very best of what time travel does, which is small scale. It is personal. It focuses on character and what can time travel do to tell a deeply personal, character-driven story.
I'm fighting. I'm getting emotional just thinking about this episode, honestly, and I'm fighting back tears just thinking about it. Every time that I hear him say Jaco and kiss Jake on the forehead, it just, everything that I feel for my children is perfectly encapsulated with what Ben Sisko has with his son Jake. The struggle of being a single father, I felt that deep in my spirit. And I think one critic writes here that, quote, it sums up everything that made DS9 so unforgettable. And I think that's the perfect way to say this. I mean, like, Tony Todd is so fantastic as an actor, and I mean, he's also the voice of Venom, for Pete's sake. So good. But yeah, DS9 it's so crazy to think about recency bias, but as you know, fans know, I'm watching through it for the first time, and episode 99, guys, is right around the corner, and that is all about DS9. It is a complete episode, mailbag, everything. So be ready for 99. But I also think of, and I almost put this on my list, but I was like, well, we can just add it, an addendum here. But like also the episode Time's Orphan, when Molly gets trapped in time and comes back, and she's an older version of herself, but she's lived for 10 years in the wilderness on her own and is completely mute, and just watching this family that I love so dearly. Yes, Miles finally got his crap together. I had enough of his crap the first couple seasons, but I finally am tolerating him because Keiko is a goddess and a queen. But just watching them struggle with their daughter, and just the heartbreak and the day in, day out struggle. And then, ultimately they like just sacrifice their daughter to time just because it's the right thing to do. And then for little Molly to come back, fortunately, at the end, it's just heart-wrenching. And what DS9 in particular does so well, better than I'm ready to elevate this, and I'm not even done yet. I've on episode 7 of season 7. I've got to crank it out. We just got a couple weeks, but what DS9 does so well, and I'm ready to elevate this. It's not just my favorite Star Trek. I think it might be my favorite thing in all of my fandoms. It's such a beautiful thing, and what it does to the best of anything that I've ever viewed is it makes you feel these characters, and it makes you care about these characters. It makes you love these characters. I would do anything for any one of these characters. I love them all. Yes, even Miles. You can identify with so many of them. I feel like the dorky thespian that is like a fish out of water, like Julian Bashir. I feel like a father who cares so deeply, and is thrust into this role of leadership, like Ben Sisko. I would follow that man into the trenches. Like, there is no one that I would follow once more onto the breach than Ben Sisko. I feel like a man caught between two worlds, like Worf. I feel so many different things for so many different characters as a writer with Jake, and always just trying to do the right thing and tell the story that needs to be told, like Jaco. I love baseball, and so I just watched the baseball episode, and oh my god, Rom. Okay, we have to save some of this for. I'm sorry, but like, this show's perfect, and I can't wait for 99.
Yeah, episode Deep Space 99, I think, is going to be a lot of fun for us. There's a lot of pent-up stuff that I think we need to discuss.
Ram and Lita, we love you. Ram and Lita, the goats, we love you. One of the most beautiful relationships I've ever seen. See, Ollie agrees.
Yep, he usually does. All right, so what is your third and final favorite time travel story?
So this is kind of like a curveball, sticking with the baseball puns. This is a series that I think was canceled after 2 seasons on NBC, and it kind of flew under the radar. I'm talking about Timeless. And like I said previously, I love historical fiction and the idea of dancing around in time. I was willing to excuse some of my preconceived notions about time travel stories because this just like brought to the forefront some of the historical figures and time periods that are so fascinating to me. So Timeless is this group of people that go back into history. Here's the synopsis. When a group with nefarious intentions attempts to change the world as we know it by altering the past, Lucy, a historian, Wyatt, a soldier, and Rufus, a scientist, unite to form an unlikely partnership traveling through time to save history. Their riveting adventures take them to some of the most thrilling, volatile, and critical events on record, including a venture to the Old West, a sojourn to the Alamo, a visit to the famous Chicago World's Fair, and a crusade into Nazi Germany. Along the way, they cross paths with famous historical icons such as Josephine Baker, Harry Houdini, Ernest Hemingway, and infamous rivals Elliot Ness and Al Capone. But every step the team takes to protect history puts everything we know at risk, because changing one thing changes everything. And what I love about this show, other than the fact that Matt Lanter, Anakin Skywalker himself, is one of the central characters, is, and you touched on this previously, how do you tackle, the social issues when you're going back in time like that? And having a black character, Malcolm Barrett, as Rufus, being one of the three of that triumvirate of main characters is really fascinating as he goes back in time and stuff like that. So this was a really fascinating series, and also because it really brought to the forefront some of the one of the podcasts that I love that you introduced me to was Stuff You Missed in History Class. These characters that we don't talk nearly enough about, like Josephine Baker, like Bass Reeves, and all these characters that have fascinating stories, but we brush over it to talk about the Civil War for the 8,000th time, because if you live in the South, they can't stop talking about the Civil War. But, so some of these underserved characters in history, really bringing them to the forefront, and, bringing the Tulsa riots, which was a very important piece of history that is so far neglected. And I think subsequent series like The Watchmen and Lovecraft Country did so intricately and perfectly. It's really, really important that these underserved portions of history and characters of history are brought to the forefront, and throwing the sci-fi time travel aspect and this big bad corporation a la the Templars again. Like, that's my bread and butter. So I really love this series, and it deserved way more than 2 seasons. But I think it's on Peacock, which I just ponied up to watch WrestleMania. So I'm going to have to dive in and watch this again.
So I heard of this show and repeatedly, wanted to make time for it and never got to, because it sounds like, exactly up my alley. I don't know much about it overall besides what you just told me and a few articles that have floated, my direction when the series was canceled, and how many people were upset about it, and that, it had a very, very dedicated following. So I'm putting this one on my list as something that I need to check out, and soon.
All right, Dave, this is really interesting, because you left off Doctor Who, but you included something rotten, dare I say, on your list?
You know what? I don't give a crap. I don't give a crap what people say about this show, and I tell you why. So first of all, the show I'm getting ready to talk about, did it run for long? No. Ran for a season. Does it hold up by modern standards? Probably not. But, when you're a child and you encounter a certain type of storytelling for the first time, and it leaves an indelible fingerprint on you, this is that show. This is the show that introduced me to the notion of time travel. And so I have no choice but to talk about Voyagers with an exclamation point, because that's the
I'm
official
sorry.
way to spell it.
I'm sorry, Google brought me up to the wrong thing. This is something else. I don't know if it's rotten or not.
Yeah, so Voyagers with an exclamation point is a science fiction television series that
I didn't have the exclamation point. That was my fallacy.
The exclamation point is extremely important. So this is a time travel series that aired on NBC from 1982 to 1983. I think it had a grand total of 20 episodes. And it is, in essence, about a guy called Phineas Bogg. Yes, very sort of reminiscent of Phineas Fogg. Yeah, played by John Eric Hexum, who is part of a society of time travelers known as the Voyagers, whose job it is to basically make sure that history always occurs exactly as it's supposed to. His range on his little device that allows him to travel through time is it's called an Omni. Is supposed to go only up till about 1970, but there's a malfunction, and he ends up in 1982 in the room of a orphan who called Jeffrey Jones, played by Mino Palouse, who is pretty much all alone in the world and falls out of a window. Bogg dives after him and saves him by using his Omni device. But now there's no way for Jeffrey to go home because the Omni can't travel as far as 1982 normally. Flip side there is that Bogg lost his guidebook that shows exactly how history is supposed to happen, but thankfully Jeffrey is kind of a history nerd and knows a whole bunch about how history is supposed to happen, and so the two team up, traveling through time together and trying to make sure that history occurs exactly as it's supposed to. So this is, not the small-scale personal storytelling that I love so much in time travel series as an adult, but it is very, very cool because it plays right into my absolute adoration of history and the things that happened in the past. It has been described by modern reviewers as a live action version of Mr. Peabody and Sherman, which I think is ironically probably fairly accurate. It's pretty child friendly overall. It's very much a product of its time. Its history isn't always perfect by modern standards, but there is something really swashbuckling and adventuring about this show. And I'm going to say it right now. Dynamite, Boom, any other comic book publisher, if you want to get the rights to this thing, I have a mean reboot I'm willing to pitch you, because I have mad love for these 20 episodes. I think even by modern standards, there is a huge amount of potential in the actual, basic premise of this show, and, set me loose and I will write it for you. No problem. I might not even charge you. I have mad love for this series, despite the fact that it's aged, despite the fact that, it's not always on point. There's really, really great chemistry between Mino Palouse and Jeffrey, as Jeffrey Jones, and John Eric Hexum as Phineas Bogg. I think there's really like a cool interplay between the two. I'll say that Hexum, who I think came to a pretty bad ending, has great charisma in the role. There's just really something about this show that has captivated me since childhood, and I keep coming back to it, no matter how hokey or aged it is. There's just something there, Kris. It's hard to put my finger on, but I love it.
Just in my very rapid research, now that I realized I was looking up the wrong series, I'm already sold based on two catchphrases: "Smart kids give me a pain" and "Bat's breath."
Yeah, there's just really something about this one, man. It's just I don't know. I wished maybe I need to sit down and just rewatch the whole thing and then write down my thoughts about what it is about the show that keeps captivating me. It's got its hooks in me, man. Alrighty, folks. Well, that is it for our big talk. What are your favorite time travel stories, and what do you like most about time travel stories? Is it the big, epic, save the world stuff? Is it the smaller character stuff? What are the things about time travel stories that captivate you? Find us on social media, on Instagram and Twitter at that nerd Dave and at that nerd Kris, or at Nerd Byword, and tell us your thoughts. Now we're going to take a quick break, and when we come back, it's time for some nerd commendations. Alrighty, folks, we're back, and it's time for the most positive piece of our episodes. It is, of course, time for Commendations. And Kris, bring on some Turtles love.
Man, this is one of my favorite things in entertainment. I love when editorial or the powers that be, whoever, lets a creative person just cook in the kitchen. And for this week's nerd commendation, that would be the TMNT Annual 2022, which was written and drawn by Juni with colors by Ronda Pattison. Now, Juni is this up-and-coming star in comics. They recently published Jelia. I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly. Which is a graphic novel based deeply in West African folklore. So that's next on my to-read list immediately after this. But they've also done a lot of covers for the Ninja Turtles comics. But giving them the entire annual should just tell this beautiful story. So spoilers if you're not there yet for TMNT comics. But Master Splinter has died, and the brothers and everyone in their circle are still reeling from that. They haven't properly processed that grief. And so this is just like a one-shot story about, processing and dealing with grief. And there's a particular foe that they have to face that feeds off of anguish and grief and pain and loss. And so this is just a really beautiful story about how to deal with things like that. I think probably the quote of the nerd world for last year was from WandaVision, what is grief if not love persevering? I hope I'm getting that right. But nonetheless, it's something that if you've ever lost someone, particularly someone that is close to you or in your family or someone influential like a parent or a parent figure, like that really, it's a really tough thing to deal with. And so this was just like a beautiful story. And then, Juniba's art, I'm falling head over heels in love with, and being new to this creator. It's electric. It's I believe that they list, the Cartoon Network's Adult Swim animation as one of their primary influences. So you get like some Samurai Jack in this, and that lends itself perfectly to the Turtles. But there's also parts of it that are, while you have the stuff that is like tough and gritty and street level heroes, you also have stuff that's like the big smile showing all their teeth that you can find on Juniba's Instagram page, like it's just happiness. And then you also have a portion of the story where they go back to their roots in the Mirage comics, and they're all wearing the red headbands. And so it's just like a really beautiful, like, one-off story. And I'm really excited to go and read Jalea now. And hopefully Juniba can come back and do some more TMNT stuff, because this was a really great story. Also, a fantastic review on Comics Bookcase by my friend Zach that you can read as well. But do yourself a favor. You don't really need any continuity or to be super up to date, other than that Splinter has passed, to read the story. So not any continuity errors or any or continuity conflicts, I should say. But yeah, the TMNT Annual for 2022 by Juni and Ronda Pattison is my nerd commendation for this week.
Did you just say that Splinter dies?
Yep.
You do realize that I'm not caught up on TMNT comic books. How could you, sir?
Oop.
How could you? All right. Well, so this sounds definitely like something I need to check out just as soon as I get caught up, because it sounds incredibly consequential. Obviously ties in with the larger themes of what's going on with the main book at the time. I'm there for it, man. But then again, I'm there for anything TMNT that is put out by IDW. They just know their stuff, man.
For serious. I mean, like everything is coming up roses for IDW, Ninja Turtle comics.
I totally agree, man.
All right. What is your nerd commendation for this week, Dave?
We're going to go nonfiction for a second. There is a very, very interesting book by John Morris that I think is totally worth checking out. John Morris is a cartoonist and graphic designer. He has this really cool little blog that he's been operating, since the 90s, called Gone and Forgotten, which is sort of a look at the weird stories and characters that have popped up in comic books. And so this book is sort of an outgrowth out of that blog, and it's called The League of Regrettable Superheroes. And although this is a humorous book and it's very tongue-in-cheek, I think it's also an important book. Because as we know, especially in the early goings of when superhero comics became sort of a thing, many publishers came and went very quickly. Many characters and concepts were attempted that never caught on as well as something like Superman, Batman, or Spider-Man. And a lot of that kind of stuff is kind of forgotten these days. And I think even the unsuccessful attempts are sort of an important part of the history of the medium. And this book basically goes through a whole bunch of characters that were attempted by various publishers and never quite caught on. The book is divided into the Golden Age, the Silver Age, and the Modern Age. And, hits fascinating characters such as the Speed Centaur, the Black Dwarf, Dr. Hormone, which may be a personal favorite, Mr. Muscles, Fat Man, which is exactly what you think it is. And then, ironically, also includes Rom the Space Knight and the original Outsiders. So it features, a little write-up by Morris with, a very, very humorous approach, a pull quote of a weird quote that is associated with the character, and then, of course, some art to show off, the character. And I absolutely have to say that I had much more fun than I probably should have had with this book, because I have the deepest respect for any creator that steps out there and attempts to create, especially in a time period when, comic books were very much no holds barred, like at the beginning, and you never quite know what's going to catch on, so you throw anything against the wall hoping that'll stick, and some of the stuff gets weird. So I laughed. I'll freely admit I laughed at some of this stuff, but I also found it just incredibly enjoyable to see this slice of comic book history. There is a companion piece to this one that I have not checked out yet, called The Legion of Regrettable Supervillains, which goes kind of through the same sort of structure, but looking at the villains from comic book history. And I'm really looking forward to reading that one as well. So John Morris, The League of Regrettable Superheroes, gets my nerd commendation this week. I think it's totally worth a read.
Wow, the Outsiders. So I guess we can stay golden, Pony Boy. We also have Bozo the Iron Man on the cover.
There's also a Thor character in here, if I remember correctly. Dynamite Thor is the name of the character. I think you totally need to check out Dynamite Thor and see if that scratches your Thor itch. I don't think it will, but it might be worth looking at.
also the eye is fascinating here. But yeah, it's crazy to think, and you touched on this in your spiel there, is like it's crazy to go back to the golden age of comics and like, why did Batman work but not B-Man? Like, why did X story work but not this? It's just crazy to kind of go back in that time of history, take yourself in a time machine, if you will, and see like all the creative processes that were going on at the time. So I'm definitely checking this guy out.
Yeah, I think you'll really enjoy it, Chris. Alrighty, folks, that's it for this week's episode of the Nerd Byword podcast. If you like what you heard, jump on your favorite podcasting platform. Give us, a rating, a review, subscribe so you never miss an episode. We are available on all major podcasting platforms and even some non-major ones. And of course, you can also find us at our own website, nerdbyword.com.
And as always, hit us up on social media at Nerd Byword on Twitter and Instagram, or individually, that Nerd Dave, that Nerd Kris. And as always, stay well and stay nerdy.
The Nerd Byword is written and produced by Kris and Dave, two nerds with a love of all things pop culture. The podcast features music by Al Jimenez with additional drops composed by Joe Biondi. Our show art is by Ashery Design. Find us at nerdbyword.com and wherever podcasts are available.